Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the USMLE Clinical Rotations Masterclass 2023. In this video, I'll be discussing and going over what are US clinical rotations. Number one, why do you need them? What are different kinds of rotations, and all in depth about breaking down like different kinds of rotations. And later we'll even talk about how to get free US clinical experience. So first of all, why do US clinical rotations matter and why do you need to do them? So there's 3 points I would like to bring across, and a lot of people even underemphasize their importance, overemphasize scores, which I think is one of the biggest flaws you can have on your application. And the reason is everything in America has a quantity aspect of evaluation as well as a quality aspect, contrary to what you'll see in other countries. So they just don't want like your scores. They want to know that there's a person behind those scores who can communicate, because at the end of the game, what matters is a doctor that can communicate. And the only way to evaluate that a lot of the times is seeing you in clinical scenarios in America. So the term US clinical experience. And one of the best evaluators you can have for evaluating you in the context of America would be an American physician. So here comes my first point. Number one, it generates something called as the letter of recommendation. So the letter of recommendation is this document of, praise, if you like to be, of your clinical skills as well as professionalism, your communication skills during the rotation, which like based on these skills, they write you this LOR, letter of recommendation, which is like just a praise towards you, recommending you for a certain spot in a residency. So hence the US LOR. So the only way to get that, a lot of the times, the only way to get that is by going and doing a rotation in America. And the type of rotation also dictates what kind of LOR you're going to be generating for yourself. In general, we give about like 4 LORs. This could be 3 US based LORs and 1 LOR from your home country. But if you really want the best application, I would say do 4 rotations. More about this later. Second part of the game, the reason like this matters is when you're applying for your math season, you will give them your scores, you will give them your LORs, you will also give something like make something called as the ERA CB. What happens is there's this section in the ERA CB, it's called the work experience, where you'll be typing out what was your experience during your clinical rotations in, let's say, your country and during your US clinical experience, which is where US clinical rotations become important, because they will be looking at your description. Okay, how many patients did you see in that rotation? What were the settings? What was the context of the rotation? Did you use EMRs? So in America, we use EMRs all the time, electronic medical records rather than papers to keep records. So were you able to access Epic or Cerner, which are the most widely used and the most trusted EMRs all across America? So that becomes important, because during the selection process, they're going to be looking at your LORs. And secondly, they're also going to be looking at your ERA CB. Thirdly, this is post application. So once you've submitted your application, you're going to get interviews. During those interviews, what's going to happen is they're going to ask you tell me about the most memorable patient experience you ever had. Tell me about a difficult patient. Tell me the difference between US practice of medicine versus what's happening in your country. So in order to answer these questions authentically and in a US based context, you need to have some level of experience here so that you can communicate scenarios where you performed well in the system, so they can grade you properly during the interview. Otherwise, it just becomes harder, right? And this becomes important in the ranking process, because as I'll touch later, interviews are the most important part in the matching. It's like scores and the clinical experience can get you the interview, but what gets you through the interview to the residency spot is your performance in that interview, and that comes from your experience in America, like during clinical rotations, right? So now I'm going to be jumping into different kinds of rotations. So broadly speaking, I can divide them in like 2 ways. The first way I'm going to divide them is hands-on versus hands-off. So people ask me, what does hands-on mean? What does hands-off mean? And this is something that used to confuse me too. So I'm going to be really breaking this down into layman language. Hands-on means that you are allowed to interact with the patient, you're allowed to take history, do physical exam, mental status exam. If you are doing a surgical rotation, you're allowed to kind of help and participate in the surgery. Like in broader terms, you're just allowed to take part in patient care. That's hands-on. And for that, you need malpractice insurance, because that's just the case in America. If you are going to be interacting with the patient, you must have malpractice insurance, otherwise like it can get risky. So if it is a hands-on experience, chances are they'll ask you to get malpractice insurance. Secondly, what is hands-off experience? So hands-off is the opposite of hands-on, means you are not allowed to take part in any part of their clinical care, be it access to the EMR, be it access to management plans, be it access to even doing like a history or physical exam. So let me now go into depth about different kinds of hands-on rotations. So for hands-on, there are rotations that only undergraduates can do and some rotations that only graduates can do. But broadly speaking, more like as a rule of thumb, most of the times what you'll see is getting hands-on experience as a student is much easier than if you were to graduate. And the reason for that is related to insurance. There is this insurance system in place that protects undergraduates and doesn't really protect graduates. So you will see that a lot of like 90% of the hospitals in America don't actually take graduates. They would rather have undergraduates, though that doesn't mean graduates can't get hands-on experience, and I'll get into depth about it later. So for hands-on rotations, what you will see is that there are rotations that are only for undergraduates and rotations for graduates. Let me touch upon them. So the first rotation is electives, right? So and then there are like clerkships. So electives and clerkships are basically synonymous. Then there are these rotations called as sub-internships. However, you will see that it is possible for graduates to also get sub-internships. So, but mainly you will see that sub-internships are reserved for people who are undergraduates. And a lot of the times, American medical students, like if they want to go into a certain specialty in their fourth year, which is their final year, they end up doing sub-internships in, let's say, medicine to get really good experience. And I'm gonna talk about what that is. So what is an elective? So an elective is like a 1 month, at least a 1 month period of experience where you just apply to a university and you work with the team, but you are not really responsible for patient care. You're just taking part in it, which is what makes it different from sub-internships. And what sub-internships, the best way I can frame it to you is, think about it like being a PGY1 intern, which is like me. So I am a PGY1 intern. I am allowed to take direct care of patients under an attending. So I am very much responsible for at least 4 patients a day. And I can see up to 8 to 10 patients if I want per day. I'm giving orders for certain medications. Let's say if it's fluids, if it's DKA, I'm giving orders for insulin. So I'm allowed to do that. And sub-internships will allow you to perform at the level of a PGY1 resident to like do those things, which later leads to a better LOR. So electives, you're just a student doing like helping the team, taking part in patient care, discussing with the team, giving your input, taking history and whatnot. Sub-internships takes you to the next level where you are giving them medications, you're responsible if something happens to the patient. So what do you think would lead to a better LOR, a better experience in your ERA CV, and a better talking point during your interview? The answer is sub-internships. So if in doubt, go towards sub-internships, even if they're costlier, because the LOR that generates, the ERA CV and the interview experience that will generate for you would be far better than an elective ever can. However, that being case, like sub-internships are still very hard to get if you're an international medical graduate, but I will talk about different hospitals later that give them. So in general, if you want to apply for electives, there's 2 ways to do this. The first one is VSLO pathway. The other one is the non-VSLO pathway. So VSLO stands for Visiting Student Learning Opportunities. It's by AAMC. AAMC stands for American Association of Medical Colleges. And what happens is they allow for students in one college or school to participate in electives in different colleges. So you can even do it from an international school if you are part of the VSLO program by AAMC, right? And there is a whole process by it. And what happens is, so basically your school has to buy yearly subscription of VSLO by AAMC, which will give you opportunities to apply to different medical schools in US in different specialties to do your clinical experience, and this is very exclusive only, and like you can only get access to a certain high level of rotations through the VSLO pathway. You can join it. I will link down a page by AMC which dictates about the whole process of like A to Z of like how to get your medical school enrolled in VSLO, even if you're from any other country. It takes about $800 per year at least to get your school enrolled in VSLO, and a lot of the times if your school doesn't pay, what you can do is everybody who's really interested in the USMLE journey, they can pool together. Let's say 10 students come together, pay $80 a year to get their school like through the VSLO pathway. What happens in the VSLO like whole program is when you apply, so you are from visiting school, right? So which is called as your home institution, and you're going to a host institution which will host you. During this process, the host institution, which is an American medical school, will evaluate you and they will write you a proper formal LOR, and this is very like good. So if you want to go to places such as Mayo Clinic, or you want to go to Yale, you need VSLO for that, and rotations can be expensive, but VSLO is really good if you want to do US clinical experience, let's say in your internship or something. Secondly, there are non-VSLO rotations that you can do. So non-VSLO rotations are still harder to get, I would say, but you can apply individually to, let's say, Mount Sinai, which is the main Mount Sinai in New York. You can apply to their website by going to Mount Sinai internal medicine electives or something like that. Just Google that and you can go to the page, send them your CV and your USMLE scores. So some schools want USMLE step 1 report and some don't. It's better if you have a step 1 report, because then you don't have to go through the hassle of TOEFL, which is another exam about like your English proficiency, and it will give you access to way cheaper rotations. There are rotations like the Cleveland Clinic rotation, I believe, which is like super cheap, $500 for a month, and they give you housing. There's Mayo Clinic, which is also very affordable. So you can only you can do this through non-VSLO too if you like, but again VSLO is better than non-VSLO in general as a rule of thumb. After this, there are sub-internships. So the sub-internships are generally harder to get, and the way you can apply them is through the VSLO pathway. There are ways to get it through the VSLO pathway, and the other way to go around this is I know of a few institutions that do give sub-internships both to graduates and undergraduates. So the first one is Stony Brook, Southampton's. So there's different branches of Stony Brook. Remember, the Southampton's is the ones that gives you the chance to do sub-internships for both graduates and undergraduates. So just Google that with the phrase a sub-internship and you'll be able to apply. You can even call them up, their program, and that will give you access to sub-internships there. So I know that one's pretty good. So we've gotten past electives and sub-internships. Now let me talk about other rotations, such as like what are called as externships, which are mainly for graduates. So let's say you've graduated from medical school and you want that hands-on experience because you want the better LOR. The only way to get that is through an externship. But keep in mind, externships are very rare, and even when you kind of find them, they wouldn't even compare to the quality of what is a sub-internship or an elective. So just keep that in mind. If you graduated, these aren't the best quality of rotations. Hard to get them at this moment. The only place I know that does give an externship is Jackson Park Hospital, which is really nice. It is a place where you need to take care of your safety, because like you can't roam around that place at night, but they will give you an inpatient in-depth experience, which by far has been like one of the best I've ever had, because I just was able to do externships. So that's the way to go for hands-on experience for this. Now let's talk about hands-off experience. So what are different kinds of hands-off experience? So the first hands-off experience that you will a lot of the times hear about and is most commonly talked about is observerships. So what is an observership? An observership is a clinical experience of 1 month duration at least, where you are just shadowing a physician. What you're doing is you're working with a physician, being their shadow, and just seeing how their day goes. You're not allowed to talk to the patient, like I told. No EMR access, no clinical examination, which is the biggest problem in observership. However, it still helps. It still goes a long way, because at least you have some experience of how like the American healthcare system works just by observation rather than like direct patient care. where you're part of it, but again, it still goes a long way compared to if you don't have any experience, and you can get that easily. Observerships are mostly done by graduates. You will see that because they don't have access to electives, and there are different institutions that give these rotations. One of the most famous ones that I do know of is the Griffin Hospital, so you can Google that, and they have like an internal medicine observership. They also have a psychiatry observership, but you can get this experience all over America. It's easy to get, and you won't have to like get a malpractice insurance because you're not getting into patient care, so it's cheaper too. However, I'm gonna talk about a few things. A lot of companies, what they do is you'll see like these different companies jump into the business of observerships. And this is like the whole place where it can kind of get risky and it can kind of get like bad. And here's what I'm going to talk to you about, like what's really happening there. So the observerships that you can get from the host institution directly are probably the best ones and the cheapest ones, because you're directly talking to that person. What these companies try to do a lot of the times is, and I'm not complaining, it's just like it's a business model, and I'm not like talking about bad against them. It's just like that's how it works. So they're playing the Uber game here, where they're connecting you to different cabs, which here are your different hospitals. And a lot of the times these hospitals don't even have residency programs. But what happens during this whole thing is, so let's say the observership was $1,000. What these agencies would be like, why don't keep $1,000 for ourselves too? So when that rotation like was $1,000 observership, they will also charge you an extra $1,000 search fee, which will make it $2,000 for you. So it can get really expensive. Secondly, what these companies will do is they will kind of not tell you where you're going. They'll tell you just the city, which is the worst part, because if you don't know where you're going, right, which is kind of risky now, and like if you don't know where you're going and you're paying that much amount of money, I'm not completely for their decision, but again, if you don't have a choice, you can't do anything but go with these agencies. But just be careful, and this is just a word of caution for you. Try to get directly in touch with hospitals, Jackson Park, Griffin, all of them you can directly contact in other hospitals rather than going for these agencies. Third point about this would be, what these agencies also do is they will place you with preceptors who are a lot of the times just practicing outpatient medicine, which isn't always as experiency. I mean, like doesn't have such a vivid experience as compared to an intense experience compared to what an inpatient experience would be. So if you look at that right now that I'm in a residency program, I'm getting inpatient experience. I am working inpatient, right? What do you think would be better, inpatient experience or outpatient experience when you're applying to such residency programs? I can definitely say that it's inpatient, right? Even as a program director, I would like prefer an inpatient experience over an outpatient experience, because you'll see emergency cases, you'll see a far more variety of cases compared to outpatient. Secondly, what you will also see is an interplay of different specialties. For example, let's say internal medicine. So you will be working with, let's say, internal medicine consults or internal medicine consult teams. And if there's a surgical case that needs internal medicine's help, you will do consults for them, which is where you will see different specialties interact. You will also go through times when, some patients from, let's say, the surgical ICU, let's say, who had like pulmonary embolectomy, let's say cardiology did that, they will get transferred to the medicine ICU. So you will be seeing surgical patients who are in the hospital, right? So that's a very, very different experience and a very, very intense and I think comprehensive experience. So most of the times PDs don't really like outpatient experience, and these companies will try to sell you on outpatient experience because that's way easier to get and way easier to sell. And a lot of the times this can get like, they will even charge you a lot for that. So please try to go with direct institutions rather than using this middleman. That's my word of caution for you. Now, other types of hands-off experience that nobody really talks about, and we'll get into the depth of this, is research electives and research fellowships. So what is a research elective? So research electives are done by undergraduate students, and you can do it for like a month or 2 months or 3 months. These are underpaid experiences. Thirdly, where you are working under a PI, which is a principal investigator, who will teach you how to do research, who will try to place you into the whole research process and get you familiar with research. And research electives are good. Like you can get this in Johns Hopkins has a really good research experience and research elective if you want to apply. So as a student, you can do that, and you can build your own network, because again, networking plays a big opportunity in the game of US electives, and you can even get electives through your research electives. And I know a few people who did that. So you can do that. Research electives again are paid. They won't pay you. You will pay them to do that elective. John Hopkins, I think, charges like $2,000, $3,000 for a month. But again, like it's a good experience. Programs like it, that if you know research, you can help the program with research, increase its reputation by publication for them, which will be beneficial for you. And it also ticks another box in your ERA CV, which is called as research experience. So your ERA CV has 3 boxes. The first one is work experience, then it's your research experience, which is not publications that came out of anywhere, but rather working in a team, and that too mostly in America, where you worked around a certain project to generate research. So that's important. That's it for research experience. Research experience is really great if number one, you want to tick that box in your ERA CV. Secondly, it is amazing for building a network of people who can vouch for you during your match, because a lot of people like these principal investigators are super famous PhDs who can get you around the system and into a program if you like to, even that program we're doing the rotation at. Thirdly, builds publications for you if you can generate it in that short amount of time, but that's about it, and can even get you free rotation sometimes, which is rare but does happen. Now jumping into research fellowships. So you will see like a lot of people do research fellowships, which can be unpaid or paid. So in general, what happens is if you have a good research CV where you're published, you can interview and apply for these research fellowships in different institutions, where you'll be doing a postdoctoral research, is what they say, for an year or like 2 or 3 under a certain visa if you want one, or like if you don't want one, you can do it in under green card. Generally, the first 6 months are unpaid because they have to at least assess if you can participate in giving a research output which is desirable for them. However, after this 6-month period of time, you can start getting paid if you are good at what you do, and generally you'll be paid a residence salary, so $60,000 to $70,000 per year to cover your expenses. This can be again, but the best part about research fellowships is, number one, you don't have to pay for them. It will end up paying you after about 6 months, right? Secondly, if you want to match into competitive programs, a research elective or a research fellowship is a minimum like required. Let's say if you want to apply for neurosurgery, dermatology, it's very hard to get into these programs, even for American medical students, without a postdoctoral research, just because of how competitive these specialties are. And how does that help? So let's say you worked for 2 years as a post researcher generating research for a program. Number one, PI has connections. Your principal investigator who's a PhD is well known in their field so many times, and they will vouch for you, call people, program directors whenever you're applying for the match, get you the interviews, get you into certain programs. Secondly, what this does is you will generate tons of research, get tons of research experience, which will go into your CV. Again, that's good for the program where you're applying at and you're interviewing at, because you're going to be publishing for them, and which program doesn't like free publications, right? Thirdly, what happens during this whole time is you also get access to free rotations, because of, like, I know a friend who was doing this like in neurosurgery. She was doing a research fellowship, and she got access to whatever sub-internship she wanted in whatever institution, because she just knew like the chair of Duke who could like pull connections for her, and who could just ask different host institutions who will just give her free sub-internships, which is like, who doesn't want that? So in case like you feel like USMLE is getting expensive for you, learning research skills, having research skills, and getting research fellowships can change the whole game for you, right? So that's for research fellowships. So now I'm going to be talking about rating different types of United States clinical experience. The first one would be sub-internships, if you can get them, because more the responsibility, the better the LOR, the better the interview goes, the better the CV. Second would be electives, but that's only for undergraduates. Thirdly would be externships, because these are hands-on for graduates. Fourthly would be observerships, which are observing, being a shadower, again goes along way if you if you like just your application misses USCE. Last would be a research elective. There's just one hands-on experience that I think can be very beneficial, which I think a lot of people underestimate and have talked about it. It's a research fellowship, which will even pay you if you want to. Now, how to search for USCE. So the number one way, if you're a student, is please get your institution enrolled in VSLO. Will give you access to tremendous opportunities to prominent programs in their own class, in the likes of, let's say, Mayo, or in the likes of Yale, which other people won't have access to. So you will have an upper hand in the match. If you can't go the VSLO way, please apply directly through institutions. A good way to do this is, I'll link these two tools down which I'm talking about. It's Residency Explorer and Frida. So Residency Explorer and Frida, what they do is, you can, like, we use them during the match to apply to different programs, and you can actually use them during when you're applying for different kind of electives too. And how come like that works? The reason that works is some institutions have their own residency programs, some institutions don't. So you want to apply to institutions which have their own residency programs, so that, like, you know, what happens is during the match process, a lot of the times they consider your rotations there because they've been with you, they've experienced how you work, which can highly increase your chances of matching in that program, right? So we want to do electives at institutions which have their own residency programs, and Frida and Residency Explorer will give you access to them. Always sort it based upon the percentage of IMGs matched into that institution, because, you know, like, the more percentage of IMGs it has, the more chances that it will give you the preference. However, that is not to say that if you do it at, like, let's say an Ivy League program which has its own residency program, it will boost your CV so much that every other program that is, let's say, non-Ivy, or, you know, isn't up to that program's reputation, will prefer you because you've been through that program and you'll get LOR from that. But for most people, it's just better and cheaper to apply just programs with the maximum percentage of IMGs, even though they might not be Ivy League, or even though they might not be the most reputable, because that just increases your chance to in that institution, which is far easier to get in than, like, you know, just broadly increasing your chance to the Ivy League LOR. Lastly, even if you're looking for observerships, please apply via websites. The last choice should be any kind of agencies. If you don't have any other option, you can go for how to get free USCE. So understand there's ways to get free USCE. The number one is connections, and this could be personal connections or professional connections. So personal connections is if you know somebody who's a family friend, you know people who know people, you can pull these connections to get you free observerships in clinics where, like, they don't really have to worry a lot about your malpractice insurance because it's mostly an observership, right? So that's free USCE, always comes in handy. Secondly, the other way to go around this is your seniors who have gotten into different residency programs sometimes can get you access to free observerships. I've seen that happen, but that's rarer than, like, personal contacts. So these are your professional contacts, right? The other way to pull around these things is by doing a research fellowship or a research elective with somebody who's renowned, and ask other people to give you free electives, which 100% happens, right? And my friend got a sub internship out of a research position, that too free, which is, like, mind blowing to me. Also, lastly, go to conferences, join organizations such as, there's the AMSA organization, which is for American Medical Student Association, which has a membership fee, or I think it might be even free for students. Just check it up. So it'll give you access to free rotation sometimes, because you get to know people who know people, which can help you broadly in the match. Also with the electives, my final piece of advice, right? How should I navigate this whole elective journey in the USMLE? So I've talked about a few golden rules of thumbs. The last golden rule of thumb I want to add to this whole game is try to get recent USCE rather than older USCE, because programs prefer recent experience, which means you have recent clinical skills which haven't dissipated over time. So let's say a person A did a clinical experience at an institution which was 6 years ago versus a person B who did it just now. Which one do you think, as a program director, would I favor? I would favor the most recent one. So the more recent the USCE, the better. Secondly, a rule of thumb is trying to get USCE more than 6 months, and especially if it's hands-on, is a waste of time, because most programs have a requirement of a 6-month USCE period, less than a 6-month USCE period, not even a 6-month USCE period. They won't, like, even when you're applying to them. So getting more than 6 months is just, like, not required and is a waste of money. I would rather, let's say if I'm applying for the match, after, let's say, those 3 or 4 months of electives, I would apply for a research fellowship where I would learn research, build connections and network, which will also give me access to different people in the field who can pull strings for me, who can help me, which goes a long way. So anyways guys, thank you for watching. Take care. Bye. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.